Good evening. There is quite a lot of ethnic conflict in Britain. You've heard some of the examples already about recent riots across the country. Also a year prior in Leicester, different communities there were quarrelling over foreign issues not related to this country's history, its traditions. There are even smaller examples where this stuff occurs. I was taking a bus to Camberwell last year. It was stopped because there was a running knife fight in the road, and it transpired half an hour later that it was over a dispute between two rival nations in the Horn of Africa. And I had absolutely no idea what that was about. It certainly delayed my commute, and that was deeply upsetting. But that shouldn't happen, right? That shouldn't happen in London. And that's not, I don't think, what the Brexit movement had in mind when they thought of global Britain was importing the ethnic conflicts of the world to the streets of our capital. This title of this debate is Identity Politics and Ethnic Conflict. And I think it's very important to stress that they are two different things, but the latter is, I think, motivated or supported by the Trojan horse of the former. There is so much ethnic conflict because identity politics allows it to seep into wider political culture. And the key vignette I have for this, I think, is there was a local election in Leeds last year. A Green candidate called Mothin Ali won the seat. And the footage was joked about at the time, but it was actually foreboding for what happened later that year. But there's a white woman clapping, very happy. I imagine she secured some ginormous political victory for tackling greenhouse gases. And then the Palestine flag appears in front of her, and a swarm of men appear, and Mothin Ali and his friends are clapping, and they start shouting, "We will not be silenced. This is for Gaza. This is for Palestine." Now that is political sectarian voting on ethnic lines, co-opting a political movement in this country for an external foreign issue. That's really troubling. And personally, I've always associated local government with like inns and potholes, not Palestine. I mean, it's just a personal view. I know these are increasingly, straying political times. And during the election that we just had, there was certainly a trend that I noticed and reported on quite a lot, which was about different forms of sectarian politics suddenly appearing. Other people wanting to get into this sort of pro-Palestine act. There was the group Hindus for Democracy. They put forward a Hindu manifesto, which several Tory candidates in particular signed up for. There was also a Sikh manifesto, a Jewish manifesto, all put up by fairly opaque groups behind them in a lot of scenarios. The Tories made one gain in the general election just gone. It was Leicester East. The candidate was a Hindu. They signed the Hindu manifesto. The seat had a significant Hindu voting bloc that went behind it. The only Tory gain. I think the only Tory gain of that election was through ethnic conflicts. It was a pro-India win. Don't talk about this. I think it's really fascinating. The Sikh manifesto, I mean, I'll just read a line from it. I had a great joy reading through all 30 pages. The Federation behind the Sikh manifesto accused conservative politicians of appalling xenophobic and unacceptable actions towards Sikhs and the deliberate demonization of Sikhs to appease the Indian government. The next day, I saw Theresa May photographed with it, with the new Tory candidate for her seat, even though this manifesto was so visibly and deliberately anti-Tory. It was saying that Tories were a racist party. Tory candidates felt the need to sign up for it and show their allegiance to this document. Because if they didn't, they weren't going to get elected. That is ethnic conflict in politics in Britain. Again, I don't think it's discussed widely enough. So I've said that identity politics is the Trojan horse through which much of this ethnic conflict comes in. It's the people not wanting to criticize it, people giving special allowances for minority groups, and they can act in different ways. That's all, I think, quite a racist perspective that people have. They look down as a bigotry of low expectations. But there's another troubling aspect behind this, and I've kind of alluded to it a few times, which is the amount of silence on these issues, that people don't want to talk about these issues. People don't want to talk about the Hindu manifesto, the Sikh manifesto, other such political acts which are explicitly foreign and not in the interests of Britain when they're put forward. So how do we get around that? Well, we do need to talk about it. We do need to report on these issues. We do need to go into communities that are affected by this. And the key experience I've had, which reminds me of this all the time, is that when I was in Liverpool Crown Court earlier this year for the charging of a teenager who the CPS says is behind the Southport attacks, There was a lull between moving him from the youth court to the Crown Court, and then, all the hacks and reporters were sat around chatting. And I don't like to criticise my colleagues in the media, but they were asking, why is there so much rioting in all these places? And one person said, well, what have they got to be angry about in Hartlepool? I'm not going to say who said that, obviously, because they're not here to defend themselves, but they're pretty well known. And a few months earlier, we'd finally learnt that a man had been convicted of terrorism for an asylum seeker from Morocco who'd walked out of his accommodation, stabbed a pensioner in the neck and killed him. There's quite a lot to be angry about in Hartlepool. And that reporter didn't know about that incident. I took the great pleasure in explaining it to them. Is worrying, is really worrying. So until we get rid of the identity politics Trojan horse and the silence around these issues, we are going to see more ethnic conflict in Britain. It's not inevitable, but we can change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.